Good morning to you. As the Wall Street Journal is saying this morning, the American financial system has been, and I'm quoting here, shaken to its core.
Financial institutions are in trouble. 158-year-old Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy.
Financial markets around the world went into freefall today as confidence in the banking system fell sharply.
Millions of American homeowners as a slowing housing market has turned some mortgages into time bombs.
One failed mortgage might not threaten the whole financial system. Millions of them could. 34 subprime mortgage companies have gone bust in just the last few months.
Bear Stearns is hurting. The stock cut in half, investors in general cutting out.
Fannie and Freddie may not have enough money on hand to stay in business.
50 million people had mortgages roughly at that time out of 75 million homeowners. When that bubble burst, it hit home to probably 40% of the households in the country, these people that had mortgages on their houses. And fear spread in the month of September 2008 at a rate that was like a tsunami.
Who do you hold responsible for that?
Bubbles are always hard to ascertain the originators of it. There really aren't any originators. Everybody got caught in. Some were foolish, some were crooked, some were both. But you had a mass illusion that it could go on forever.
It was March 13th, which happens to be my birthday. I was at Avra, this Greek restaurant down here with my parents, my family. The CEO of Bear Stearns called me. It was maybe 9 o'clock at night and said, Jamie, I need $29 billion before Asia opens or we're going to have to declare bankruptcy. And I said, Alan, I can't possibly lend you $29 billion overnight.
Bear Stearns, one of the most admired firms in America, now one of the most endangered.
The firm has been buffeted by constant rumors of a looming liquidity problem.
What happened at Bear Stearns was the first true demonstration of what the crisis looked like, because it was a crisis of confidence. Bear Stearns owned a huge piece of the housing business, and they had taken on some of the worst risk. All of a sudden, all sorts of investors on Wall Street said, I don't think that Bear Stearns is good for the money. And not only do I not think they're good for the money, I got to get my money out of there immediately.
Bear Stearns is the biggest casualty yet of the nation's mortgage mess.
The company has become a poster boy for the real estate bubble.
We knew that there are excesses in housing, and we missed it totally. Homeownership went, very sadly, from shelter to an investment. When I had joined Goldman Sachs in 1974, the industry was growing in many ways. You saw an evolution in modern finance. You began to see different forms of securitizations.
Mortgage-backed securities really came into being in the 1980s. They started as a really good idea, which made a lot of sense, which was a way to take mortgages, package them up, and sell off the cash flows. So an investor would buy a portion of all these mortgages, and the mortgages would pay that investor. And the idea was that made investing in mortgages much less risky, because instead of investing in just me, you were investing in 1,000 people.
As we moved to securitization, we had cheaper mortgages. If you could afford 20% down, fine. But if you couldn't, let's say you have 5%, let's say you had 1%, let's say you had 0%. We came up with all these ways to get loans to more people. You know, it was certainly felt exciting at the time that we were going to spread the American dream all over the place.
It's a record year for housing, and it shows no signs of abating.
In the early 2000s, the price of borrowing to finance a house was very low, very attractive.
These exotic loans have exploded in the last 3 years.
Interest-only loans, adjustable rate loans, no down payment options.
People who were earning like $1,000 a month working as a gardener or working as a hairstylist saying they were making $10,000 a month because you could do these things called stated income loans, which came to be known as liar loans, where you could just say, here's what I make, and nobody would check. And so you could get away with murder.
Demand for these $1,000,000+ homes has outpaced supply.
You got speculators buying multiple houses. People are flipping.
Your neighbor who's not as smart as you are, but nevertheless went out and bought a couple of houses and flipped them, is now driving a better car than you are. And you say, yeah, that does make pretty good sense. I wish I'd started earlier.
As the housing market heated up, there were asset management firms around the world that all wanted a way to benefit.
Most things on Wall Street start with a concept that makes a lot of sense. The thing about Wall Street is they take everything to an extreme.
They take thousands of mortgages and staple them together. And they go to investors and they say, what do you want? You want safe? You want risky? We got all these mortgages.
There was an incentive to chop up these loans because along the way, there was a profit, a fee to take for each institution that somehow touched every piece of the loan.
Goldman Sachs, with quarterly profits up 93%.
Everyone was making a lot of money because of the housing market, liquidity, globalization.
Top executives will earn as much as $20 to $50 million each.
Just the boom 2000s, people were making so much money. I could make 10, 15, 20, 30, 100 to $200 million. And so there was this competition, which was ridiculous.
Chuck Prince was the CEO of Citigroup, and he had an amazing line, which was, while the music's playing, you gotta dance.
Big bonuses are driven simply by profits and competition.
Everybody was looking at the success of Goldman Sachs and of Morgan Stanley and of Lehman Brothers, all of whom were making more and more profits.
The company will distribute a record high $16.5 billion in compensation.
So there was this remarkable pressure on everybody to keep dancing.
Another part of what drove this was belief that home prices would never go down.
The shaky housing market starting to crack at the foundation.
Particularly hard-hit markets, Miami, Vegas, Northern Virginia, and right here in D.C.
Historically, house prices have been somewhat disconnected across different parts of the country, but this housing bubble did end up being national, and it did have implications for the whole economy.
The real estate bubble everybody knows has burst.
This is the hangover after the great frat party you went to.
House prices started to fall. The economy started to slow.
Those adjustable rate mortgages are now coming due.
People who had bought these adjustable rate mortgages, when they started to reset, they couldn't afford to make the higher payments. They tried to refinance them. Their house prices declined in value, so they couldn't refinance them.
Foreclosures are up over 1,000%.
Some people start defaulting on their mortgage payments. And now that begins to ripple through.
It was very, very bad. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost their savings.
Those falling home prices are like an infection now spreading throughout the U.S. economy.
The system's not designed to function in an environment where house prices are going down. So these mortgage-backed securities start to unravel, and you got problems.
Investor confidence in the mortgage financing space is not doing well.
There is so little transparency and so little confidence in these securities that financial institutions were struggling.
I looked at one offering of mortgage-backed securities. I would have had to read over 300,000 pages to analyze that mortgage.
I had some of the smartest people in America couldn't explain to me what some of these instruments meant. And it's just like inventing more and more product in order to achieve higher and higher returns. It was taking bigger and bigger risks.
Unfortunately, maybe this is the weakness of the street back then.
How aggressive did you want to be? Maybe a lot.
I think discipline was kind of lacking. It was ourselves, Lehman, Goldman, Bear Stearns, others. The amount of risk we were taking was out of control.
Today, Bear Stearns stock dropped nearly 50%, a loss of $3 billion.
It's a rapid change in Bear Stearns over the past 48 hours. It reintroduces anxieties about what's not known.
It's a complete lack of confidence in Bear Stearns, a run on the bank. The Fed's job is to prevent a catastrophe.
This was a four-alarm fire. It became very clear to us that Bear Stearns wasn't going to exist on Monday if there wasn't a solution. The markets were so fragile and so interconnected that we were going to have to do some pretty repugnant things if we were going to save the American economy for the American people.
Hank came in and said, Bear Stearns is failing, and we got to do something about it. And my first reaction was, why? They made bad investments, Hank. And sadly, the people that invested in Bear Stearns, and sadly, those who worked for Bear Stearns are going to have to pay the price of working for an entity that made bad investment. He said, you don't understand. If they fail, it's going to affect the international financial system.
I had been told there was no authority for the Fed or anyone else to guarantee the liabilities of a failing non-bank. There is nothing more terrifying than feeling a great sense of responsibility and not having the authorities you need.
You know, we had each other in some sense to talk through options and strategy, and that helped a lot.
Ben, Tim, and I, we talked multiple times a day.
We always treated the three of them kind of as one entity, and the president always wanted to know when he was getting a recommendation from Hank, what did Ben and Tim feel?
I remember having a conference call where Hank and Tim and I talked about what the implications might be for the financial system if Bear Stearns failed and what we could do.
What we decided that morning was to buy some time to get through the weekend. Congress had given the Fed this emergency tool that we could use in extreme crisis to lend to an institution that was not a bank. So we had authority to lend, but the Fed had not done something like this since the Great Depression.
Ben Bernanke made a really bold decision to extend a loan for 28 days.
The Federal Reserve agreed basically to help finance about $30 billion of Bear's risky assets. This was the first important intervention that we did, and it was a tough call. I was a registered Republican. I believed in market solutions to economic problems, but I was a student of the Great Depression. When I went to graduate school, I knew I wanted to do economics, but I didn't know what area. And I said to myself, the Great Depression was one of the most important events of the 20th century. About a third of all the banks in the United States failed. And that, in turn, created a tremendous contraction in the amount of credit available to ordinary households and businesses. My grandfather's drugstores kept going out of business in the 1930s, and it created enormous hardships for many, many years. Later on, when I was a policymaker, took to heart the idea that allowing the financial system to collapse and the credit system to collapse was going to be extremely dangerous for the whole economy, and that was why it was so important to make the loan.
Bear Stearns was forced to take an emergency loan funded by all of us. The taxpayer bailout prompted investors to dump Bear Stearns stock.
As Bear Stearns was going down, President Bush was scheduled to be in Wall Street to make a speech at the New York Economic Club.
43rd President of the United States, Mr. President, the floor is yours.
He had showed the speech to me. He had a line in it that said there could be no bailouts. I started off by saying you could take that line out about no bailouts.
President Bush tried to make light of a grim situation.
Seems like I showed up in a interesting moment. I was unhappy about it. You know, I was a free marketer. I told people that, and firmly believed it, and still do, by the way. But Hank is a persuasive guy, and I trusted him.
Then what became apparent was a loan that was permissible for the Fed to make. No way was it going to stop an investment bank from disintegrating. And fortunately, J.P. Morgan was a buyer.
It's a really risky thing buying a big investment bank. It was a house on fire. It was collapsing. Hank and Tim were, I want you to buy it. You want to buy it. You should buy it. I said, we'll do anything we can to help. I can't be irresponsible to J.P. Morgan. I can't end up being a teetering giant after this.
He wanted to own Bear Stearns. There's no doubt about it. I'd gone to bed on Saturday night thinking we had a deal.
At one point on Sunday, I called up Hank and said, "Hey, Hank, we can't do it. It's a bridge too far." And then we started working on, well, what could you do to do it? Which is why we had this idea, well, if the Fed could finance this $30 billion, we can handle the rest of it.
Bear Stearns has a bag, let's say, of garbage. Let's just say it's trash. And nobody wants to buy all of Bear Stearns and the trash. Jamie Dimon says, I'll buy Bear Stearns, but you guys are going to have to share the trash with me. You, Tim Geithner and Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, you got to take the trash out.
It would be like Fox bailing out NBC. JP Morgan Chase joins the Federal Reserve in a frantic attempt to rescue Bear Stearns.
That was very controversial because that was, in essence, the first proto-bailout.
People woke up on Monday and thought that it was the heist of the century. People thought Jamie had stolen Bear, and people thought that Hank had basically given away the store by taking on $30 billion of terrible crapola. And that was the beginning of this debate in the country about what was happening, how bad it was going to be, and whether we should be doing any of this.
Communication was a really tough issue during the crisis. None of us were able to convince the public that what we did was not for Wall Street, but it was for the American people. Done a better job of explaining the financial system was so concentrated and so intertwined that if you want to stop the bleeding, you've got to go to the source. And the source is Wall Street. And if you don't stop the bleeding at Wall Street, you kill the economy.
The housing market, in plain English, is coming apart.
As 2008 progressed, the crisis intensified. We were all concerned about Fannie and Freddie, but we didn't know how bad it was.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the backbone of the U.S. mortgage market, holding roughly half of all U.S. mortgages. Fannie and Freddie may not have enough money on hand to stay in business.
The first thing you have to understand about Fannie and Freddie is that they are so important to the machinery of everyone's everyday life. Any person who has a mortgage, it's pretty likely that Fannie and Freddie touches you. They were publicly traded companies, like any company you would invest in, like Starbucks, like Apple, like Google. And yet they were known as government-sponsored enterprises because there was this idea that the U.S. government stood behind their debt, so that if they ever couldn't pay their debt, the U.S. government would step in.
They got a government money printing machine in which the government implicitly says, if everything goes wrong, we'll foot the bill.
That was a guarantee. It was written nowhere on paper. It didn't actually exist. And so it came to be known by this term called the implicit guarantee.
There was no guarantee, but the market assumed that there was. So you had management teams and shareholders making money off a government guarantee.
They insured something on the order of $5 trillion, something close to half of all the mortgages in the United States were insured and resold by Fannie and Freddie.
The fear was if Fannie and Freddie defaulted, that would throw the global financial system into chaos.
The company's stock price is off more than 85% since the credit crisis began last August.
They've announced huge losses. Their stock is diving. So I needed to ask Congress for enough money to calm the markets.
Thanks, Secretary Paulson and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve. We thank Chairman Bernanke for his involvement.
This was a tough political ask with the members of Congress. I felt we needed expansive authorities.
One of the proposals that you've suggested was an increase in the Treasury line of credit for Fannie and Freddie. And I have some concerns, and I suspect my colleagues do too, about having no cap, no limit at all.
If I asked for $100 billion, it wouldn't be enough. And I certainly knew I couldn't ask for a number that started with a T, trillion.
How much money are you contemplating here?
I would ask for it to be unspecified.
For some of us, it sounds a little bit like a blank check.
You're talking about potentially spending $1 trillion here.
We're a little skeptical.
One of the tough things about testimony was that you had multiple audiences. So you're sitting at this table with a glass of water, you're looking up at the senators, and so you're trying to answer their questions. But you know at the same time that you're talking to the TV camera, which is going out to American public, and then your staff member behind you gives you a piece of paper which says Dow Jones down 180 points. So you're also talking to the markets.
I looked at those hearings as largely theater. I was worrying about saving the financial system for the American people. These guys wanted to save the financial system, but they wanted to get elected. But I really believed what I said when I was testifying. I said, if you give us unspecified authorities, it'll be so powerful that we won't have to use them. If you've got a squirt gun in your pocket, you may have to take it out. If you've got a bazooka and people know you've got it, you may not have to take it out. You're not likely to take it out. By having something that is unspecified, it will increase confidence, and by increasing confidence, it will greatly reduce the likelihood it will ever be used.
He had this tremendously valuable skill, which is how to convince people to do something they did not think was in their interest.
It was Hank, in that instance and in others, who kind of laid down the law and said, this is what's going to happen.
I'm about getting something done that can get done, that will make a difference, and in my judgment is in the best interest of the taxpayer.
The sense of urgency is something I think all of us, at least most of us here, appreciate. Look, we're in the middle of this thing, and it's getting worse. And the Secretary of the Treasury says, I need some of these tools. We're in the eye of the hurricane at that point.
I got the bazooka, and I didn't think we were going to have to take it out. But the most aggressive investors get very quickly to where the most fearful investors are, faster than you can imagine. And so it was only a matter of time until we had to use the bazooka.
The takeover of Fannie and Freddie was like a military operation. Hank was the general.
Congress had no idea we were thinking of nationalizing them. And so we needed to keep this quiet.
Fannie and Freddie were politically powerful entities. Really powerful. They made people rich. Most of them were very well connected.
We had to do it in a way that they didn't anticipate, otherwise they would have used political and other forces to prevent it.
I remember talking to President Bush about this, and he was asking, how can you possibly get this done without them knowing and fighting? And I remember it came out of my mouth. The first sounds they're going to hear is when their head hits the floor.
Another tough day for shares of Lehman Brothers today. CEO Dick Fuld is actively shopping the entire brokerage firm.
Dick Fuld was looking for capital. He contacted us. I had talks with him. I came down on a Friday night, I remember, and looked through a 200 and some page 10K and scribbled a lot of notes on it. I still have the 10K. And by the time I got all through, I knew we weren't going to make a deal.
By that week in September, they were close to out of options.
The debate now is the role the government will play in all of this.
What we know now is Wall Street can bring down Main Street. And frankly, I'm going to tell you, it's a little scary.
Your company is now bankrupt. Our economy is in a state of crisis.
Did you mislead your investors? And I remind you, sir, you're under oath.
In your testimony today, right here, right now, you continue to deflect personal responsibility.
I'm going to be blunt here. People want to know if you defrauded investors.
That should be a yes or no, sir.
You don't seem to acknowledge that you did anything wrong.
We talk about what happened at Lehman, and we talk about whose fault, why wasn't I on it. My employees, my shareholders, creditors, clients have taken a huge amount of pain. I wake up every single night thinking, what could I have done differently? This is a pain
that will stay with me for the rest of my life. That's all.
If it's $200 billion for this bailout, it was $300 billion for the housing bailout, it was $30 billion for Bear Stearns. I mean, where does it end?
Now there are rumors that Lehman might be in trouble. The government would obviously come to the rescue. Lehman.
I made frequent calls to Dick Fold. We had told him repeatedly that the government can't put in capital.
Source was close to Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson saying there will be, quote, no government money in the resolution of this situation.
He puts the word out to the street. We are not in the bailout business. I did call Hank saying, you're going to regret that because it's not going to get solved without more public money. He said, I understand that.
This was a tactic, plain and simple. If we didn't communicate that, all the other Wall Street banks would believe that the Fed, would be there to put capital in.
We had two potential buyers for Lehman. The first was Bank of America. The second potential acquirer was a British bank called Barclays. We assumed that there would be some bad assets. The hope was to keep the Fed out of it if possible and to get the CEOs from the other Wall Street firms to get involved in buying those or holding those assets in some way.
Wall Street titans and top government officials have been huddled in emergency meetings, scrambling to prevent the collapse of the giant investment bank Lehman Brothers.
I convened the heads of the major firms in New York that evening.
The best financial brains in the world are in pressure negotiations to resolve the fate of Lehman Brothers.
This is like the five families. Every major character on Wall Street. This is Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. This is John Thain of Merrill Lynch. Vikram Pandit of Citigroup. Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. John Mack of Morgan Stanley.
I thought it was exactly the right thing to do. They had a problem to solve, and their problem was my problem.
These CEOs were all scared, and they were scared about what Lehman going down might mean.
I said, you're all exposed too. We don't have the means to protect you from this.
They're effectively being given an assignment. Hank and Tim are the school teachers telling the children, you're going to be broken up into groups to come up with a deal to ring fence these assets.
No one said, oh shit, I don't want to do this. But it was complicated. I mean, all of a sudden you're looking at all this data.
The banking crisis forcing another long weekend of work in both Washington and New York.
Top executives of rival banks met under tight security to discuss plans to buy Lehman whole or in parts.
It turns out that one of the potential buyers really had no interest in Lehman.
Bank of America is now reported to be in advanced talks to buy Merrill Lynch.
A shotgun wedding arranged in 2 days.
And the fact that Bank of America purchased Merrill Lynch took another serious problem off our hands.
But Barclays sure seemed very interested and identified the assets that need to be left behind. And I think the banks were largely on board to step up and take it.
We were all under the impression that this was going to go through.
There's one major hitch, which is the British government. Tim Geithner and Hank Paulson get a phone call.
There were several people they spoke to, including the bank supervisor, but the decision maker was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Secretary of the Treasury, essentially, of the UK, who was named Alistair Darling.
And the British said that for Barclays to buy Lehman would be like importing the U.S. cancer.
Bankruptcy today.
The Journal and the Times editorial on Monday morning, I would say, expressed relief that the Fed hadn't intervened.
I'll tell you, none of the three of us looked at that as a positive event. We didn't know how bad it was going to be, but we knew it was bad. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you all had an enjoyable weekend. Yeah, Monday afternoon, I was standing in the White House in front of the press corps, putting the best face I could on Lehman. As you know, we're working through a difficult period in our financial markets right now.
Lehman was a massive mistake. And I think maybe those who were involved in that decision will still defend it. But I think when you look at the tremors afterwards, I think that goes down as one of the most colossal mistakes ever.
There's a lot of retrospective analysis and so on. I think people need to appreciate that all these decisions had to be made in real time in very, very time-pressured situations. We could have lent money to Lehman, but it would not have been enough or sufficient to prevent the company from failing. There was a broad-based run going on throughout the entire company, not just on its short-term funding, but on its derivatives and on many other aspects of its business. And so the company was not savable.
For the people who believe that if they had just saved Lehman, then there would be no financial crisis, you're being naive. If it weren't Lehman, it would have been Morgan Stanley. It would have been somebody, because the fundamentals were so bad.
The Dow fell by 4.4% today, more than 500 points, the worst one-day point drop since 9/11.
After Lehman, I remember I called my management team and said, you're going to see the worst week ever in the financial history of the United States.
It was a huge liquidity problem. The bank interlending market was drying up.
You know, any institution across the United States, Caterpillar, GM, Ford, Chrysler, Harley Davidson, anybody whose existence depended on the ability of your customers to borrow or your ability to borrow, at that point, I think people thought that, you know, it was dire. We were a few days away from the ATMs not working.
I could see the crisis spreading very, very quickly from Wall Street to Main Street.
That week, one of the largest McDonald's franchisees in the country calls Ken Wilson, who's working for Hank Paulson in the Treasury, and literally says to him, I don't think I'm going to be able to make payroll next week. Think about that. And you might say, so why couldn't McDonald's do this? Well, guess what? They rely on Bank of America to roll their paper, and they're worried the Bank of America is not going to do it.
The markets were affecting the real economy. The markets were closing down, people cutting back hiring, cutting back investing, cutting back spending to protect themselves, and you were looking at what looked like could be a Great Depression.
After the failure of Lehman Brothers and the fire sale of Merrill Lynch, attention turned to AIG.
The world's largest insurance company, American International Group, is seeking emergency funding as it struggles to stay afloat.
AIG effectively was insuring all the other Wall Street banks.
Wait a minute. All your insurance is from an insurance company that's about to go bankrupt. Now you see how the fire spreads from one company to the next company. And then everybody looks and says, ooh.
AIG must raise at least $40 billion and fast.
AIG, the situation kept worsening. When we got told that they weren't going to make it through the day, you know, the needed balloon, so it was $85 billion. Imagine that.
Fed can lend against collateral. And we essentially decided that even though the loan to AIG would be very large, that there was enough value in all these insurance companies that we could take it as collateral.
AIG may not have been too big to fail, but it was certainly too interconnected to the economy to fail.
By Tuesday night, the AIG saga is at least temporarily over. They stuffed the turkey with $85 billion and they fired the CEO.
I started talking to the president about we're going to need some legislative authority. We're kind of out of ammunition.
We needed to put capital into the banking system. But Hank's concern about capital injections was that it would look like the government was nationalizing or taking over the banking system. And so his idea was to buy troubled assets. That's why it was called the Troubled Asset Relief Program, the TARP.
About halfway through the conversation, the president interrupted Hank and directed a question at Ben.
I asked are we headed for a Great Depression, and Bernanke said, you know, looks that way. And you have to make up your mind, you know. Do you care? And what I cared about was people that would be hurting. They were already starting to hurt. People getting run out of their homes, payrolls couldn't be met. And I just could envision what a Great Depression would mean. If it's bad now, imagine how bad it would really get.
As we left that meeting, the president turned to us and said, if this is Hoover or Roosevelt, for damn sure I'm going to be Roosevelt.
Hank Paulson, and
Chairman Bernanke came in. And Chairman Bernanke said to the group, if you don't give Hank Paulson what he needs, within 72 hours, the entire banking system of the United States will fail. And then the world banking system will fail on top of it.
About every 15 minutes, Majority Leader Reid would say, how much is this going to cost? $100 billion? No. Hank said, no.
We knew it couldn't start with a T. I couldn't ask for $1 trillion. I wasn't going to be unable to get unspecified again. And so the biggest number we thought we could get was $700 billion. And we thought, $500 billion sounds big, but $700 billion, $500 billion, $700 billion, many people don't know the difference. Basically, we wanted it to be as big as we could get without spooking Congress so it blew up on our face. I said we need the authorities immediately, and Harry Reid says Congress doesn't do anything immediately. And so it was after that where we all walked out, and late at night had a presser.
We reached a bipartisan agreement to work together to try to solve this problem and to do it in an expeditious manner.
I am very impressed with Chairman Bernanke, Secretary Paulson. I've said that on a number of occasions. We look forward to working with them, and we're anxious to see their proposal, which we hope to receive in a matter of hours, not days.
We're coming together to work for an expeditious solution, which is aimed right. And of course, that was the best thing that happened for the next week, because after that, it was one difficult process.
Today, on behalf of Main Street, Congress had a chance to ask some hard questions about the $700 billion bailout of Wall Street.
Why are we asked to put $700 billion to keep CEOs in their office while families get kicked out of their homes?
Why do we have 1 week to determine $700 billion that has to be appropriated, or this country's financial systems go down the pipes?
I share the outrage that people have. It's embarrassing to look at this, and I think it's embarrassing for the United States of America. Their view is, right, same as all of our view is, if you take risk and you make money, that's fine, great for you. But if you lose money, we don't expect the United States of America to be there to save you. Anything that looks like a bailout is unpopular.
The yeas are 74 and the nays are 25. The amendment is agreed to.
Hank called and said, I got him to take all the money. Plus, I think 700 other banks around the country. So probably the greatest financial bailout ever. The intervention, I think, saved a depression, but I can't prove it. I mean, I can talk till I'm blue in the face at the Rotary clubs in the heartland of America and say, man, we stopped the depression. And they'll look at me and say, no, you spent our money to bail out Wall Street.
How many times do we have to... You give me your vote on November 4th, then together we won't just win Florida, we will win the general election, and you and I together, we're going to change the country, and we're going to change the world. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you.
PM on the East Coast, we're back on the air, and we have news. There will be young children in the White House for the first time since the Kennedy generation.
Barack Obama, in our view, President-elect of the United States of America.
They've come to the G20 summit to try to drag the world's economy out of the worst downturn in living memory. World leaders are dining in Downing Street now to thresh out what appear to be the last details of a rescue plan.
Gordon Brown called it the start of a new world order. Barack Obama said the G20 summit was historic. After a day and a half of negotiations, the leaders of the world's most influential nations have signed up to a $1 trillion deal to revive the world economy and boost trade.